Hello again and welcome to another Mordy and Glory Warhammer 40k video. In today's episode, I want to take you through what I think are the top 3 guard playstyles right now. These are the kind of guard army lists, the playstyles that we have seen be highly effective both in casual and also competitive games. Now, this isn't just some theory craft video. I'm going to be basing a lot of this off my own tournament experience from what I learned when I stepped into the competitive meta. But I also will be seasoning this and supplementing it with some of the performances we have seen from other players who have done very well at tournaments with the guard. And with all of that said, let's not mess around any further. Let's fix bayonets and charge right into today's episode. Now, these play styles are in no particular order. They're just what I consider right now to be the top 3 ways of running your guard. And they all have their own unique set of advantages and disadvantages. So starting off with one of my favorite play styles, it is pure infantry, or infantry heavy, or foot guard as it is sometimes known. Now, the concept behind this playstyle is really simple. We have more bodies than you have bullets, overwhelming the enemy in a tide of boots and bayonets. Pure infantry armies tend to feature a philosophy of boys over toys. You're not going to take high quality elite units such as Kazakin, although some may appear. The main focus is going to be on as many bodies, as many wounds as you can get onto the table for the lowest and most efficient price point.
Attention guardsmen, the Commissariat has detected you have not yet liked this video. Do so immediately or else you will face the Emperor's wrath. And anyone who has not yet subscribed to the channel will be transferred to the penal battalions. That is all. Move out!
Whenever I have run pure infantry, I have found that I have needed a minimum of 200 line infantry bodies. Now, line infantry bodies doesn't just mean 200 in total, including your officers and maybe heavy weapon teams. 200 line infantry refers to how much battle line, how many solid units you have got. Because saying you've got like 200 guardsmen in your army, but actually 50 of those being characters and various fragile support teams means that actually your offensive push is only made up of, let's say, 150 guys. What you need is about 180 to 200 line infantry bodies that can push forward. 200 wounds of pure offensive mass. That's what I tend to find is required for a viable, competitive pure infantry style. The tactics and game plan around pure infantry on the surface are quite shallow, but actually there is a bit of nuance and skill to the playstyle. Firstly, you want to be on the offensive. You want to be moving forward. A lot of people see pure infantry as quite a defensive, gun-liney playstyle, but that's actually a trap. Because your army tends to have low mobility, you need to be making sure that you are going forward. You are dogpiling onto the objectives. And really that's one of the main things you're trying to achieve here. Primary objective dominance. You want to be on the 3 no man's land objectives every turn, and you want to be making sure that you are locking those down. Not only is this going to score you lots of points, even on missions where maybe you only have to hold 2 objectives to get like 10 primary, that's as much as you can get. It's not just about you scoring points, it's about denying your enemy victory points. In certain missions, holding your home objective means nothing. And so if you're able to take those 3 ones and use your huge advantage in objective control, which you're going to have, because most people will be running around with elite infantry units with like 1 OC each, or a vehicle with like 5 OC max, and you're going to be dumping a platoon of 20 guardsmen with 40 OC minimum onto an objective. So using your huge OC advantage, you're going to control those objectives, you're going to have more than enough points, you're going to have a glut of primary, and you might be denying your opponent any and all primary, or at the very least strangling him down to maybe 2 to 5 victory points depending on the mission. This is the shallow part of the infantry tactics, fairly straightforward, just keep pushing forward no matter what. There is some nuance though, like I said, there is some depth to this. And one of the big bits, and the number one thing you need to learn as an infantry commander, is how to screen. Now, if you've got your More Than Glory bingo cards, yep, you can check that one off. I've said screening in a video. I say it all the time. But screening is a really important skill. It is the art of essentially sacrificing infantry, sacrificing some units to protect others. So here's a good example. You have 40 infantry pushing onto an objective, 2 blobs of 20. But you know your opponent has got a big, horrible combat death blob in Deep Strike. Maybe, 10 Blood Angel death companies, things that I always seem to face, stuff like that, right? And you know that they're going to Deep Strike down and they're going to charge you. Now, if you march both of those blobs up onto the objectives together, just side by side, when that enemy Deep Striking unit comes down and charges, there's a very good chance it's going to charge both of your blobs. And this being a mega killy death machine whirlwind, it might kill both blobs. This is 40k after all, it's a very lethal game. And then you've just lost 40 infantry to not hold an objective. What screening is you would have 20 infantry march onto and then past that objective. You would push them back, and the other 20 infantry would go onto the objective and hold it. Now, when your opponent tries to deep strike down, they're going to be further away from the objective than they want to be, and even if they do make the charge into the more forward infantry blob and kill every single one of them, you still hold that objective. You've still got a full blob on it, and now the enemy has revealed their hand. They've played their card, and you can potentially turn around and blast that death machine unit off the board. So screening is really, really important when it comes to infantry guard, because you have a lot of bodies, but you don't have an infinite amount of bodies. And if you are careless with them, you might actually find that the enemy has more bullets than you do have bodies. 40k is very lethal. You can lose a lot of infantry if you're not careful. But what is the advantage of pure infantry guard in 10th edition? Firstly, you're very anti-meta. Everyone is gearing up to deal with tanks and monsters. They're cramming their list full of las cannons or las cannon equivalents. But those only kill one guardsman each time they shoot if they get the hit. So that's not a very efficient way of clearing through infantry. And so you have situations, and I have been in games where my opponent has had a ridiculous amount of firepower, but it's been very low volume. And he's fired every shot he's had into 1 or 2 blobs of infantry and not even killed them. Maybe he killed like 20 or 30 guardsmen in a turn. And that is not enough when I am running 200 plus. I can take those casualties every single turn. When your army's at its peak, I can take those casualties every single turn, and you can't actually table me and clear me off quick enough. So it's very, very anti-meta. Secondly, a lot of people are taking very elite armies at the moment. This is because 10th edition got rid of the force organization chart, it got rid of detachments, and so there's only one stipulation when you're building a list. You need to have one character. Everything else you can take in your army can just be the best. It can be all the tanks, it can be the Terminators, and these things are good at damage output, but they have very little objective control. 5 Terminators have to kill out of a 20-man infantry blob. They have to kill 18 of them to hold an objective. Because those 5 Terminators have got 5 OC, and those 2 guardsmen would have 4 OC combined. If there's 3 of them, they'd have 6 OC, and they'd hold that objective. So you are very, very good at locking down those objectives, and it makes it very difficult for the enemy to shift you, because unless they completely wipe you out, even if you've got a handful of survivors on there, a very strong likelihood that you're going to continue to control that objective. So you're anti-meta when it comes to the weapons that people are using, and you're anti-meta when it comes to the kind of units people are fielding. Finally, you have access and you can abuse one of the best stratagems in the game right now, reinforcements. This means when one of your infantry blobs, one of your regiment units is wiped out, you spend 2 CP, and it doesn't die, it goes back into strategic reserve. And you can do this every single turn. In fact, you can do this every phase. So if somehow you lost a unit in the shooting phase, and like the charge phase, and the assault phase, the combat phase, and the movement phase, maybe like Overwatch somehow, you could bring back 4 units of guardsmen in like a turn, like a battle round. And then you've got your own turn as well. It's ridiculous. Now, obviously, you'd have to have the CP to feed into that, but it is eminently possible to bring back 40 guardsmen in a turn, especially if you've got things like Voxcasters that might let you regenerate some CP elsewhere, or you've got units like the Lord Solar who just give you extra CP. So being able to use reinforcements essentially adds on more bodies to that count. So you might go into a game with 240 guardsmen, but if you're bringing back, let's say, an average of 20 each battle round, then actually you've gone into that game with 340 guardsmen. That's a massive number. Long story short, Pure Infantry Guard is very powerful because everyone is gearing up to deal with vehicles and they're not prepared for a horde of that magnitude. But it's all well and good being anti-meta, but our next playstyle is very powerful because it is very meta. We're going to look at Mech Guard. Mechanized Guard, or Mech Guard for short, is the concept of taking a lot of vehicles. However, some people do mix up the difference between Armored Guard and Mech Guard. Armored Guard is where you focus heavily on tanks like Lehman Russes and Rogel Dawns. Mechanized Guard is actually mechanized infantry. It's where you put infantry inside transports and then you support that with things like battle tanks. The defining principle of Mech Guard is the vehicles. You are going to overwhelm people with the amount of armored hulls that you can really get onto the table. I recently ran a Mechanized Guard army. It wasn't overly efficient or overly tuned up, which had 14 vehicles in it. 6 Chimeras, 4 Lehman Russes, 2 artillery pieces, a Battlescan and Manticore to be specific, and a couple of Scout Sentinels. That was so much armor that even in an edition, even in a meta where people are gearing up for a lot of anti-tank, people often didn't have enough to be able to deal with just that level of armored steel and rolling thunder coming down at them. The advantages of this playstyle are, firstly, you're very, very durable. You can really just ignore a lot of the small arms of your opponents. Unless you're on your very last wound, your vehicle doesn't need to worry about things like spare incidental firepower, like bolters and autoguns, things which Infantry Guard actually do care about because they do add up. Also, even with anti-tank, it can sometimes be a bit of a slog to chew through armor. And you've got things like Chimeras, which are really one of the iconic units of Mechanized Guard, which have got 11 wounds this edition, and it just takes that little bit more firepower to deal with them. Even if someone shoots a lance cannon at a Chimera, gets a perfect hit, gets a perfect wound, you failure saving, they get the maximum damage, your Chimera is still rolling around with 4 wounds. And the likelihood is they're not going to get that perfect shot every single time. You're very durable. You're also highly maneuverable. Whilst the poor bloody infantry might be slogging forward through the mud and the blood, your mechanized units are going around 10 inches a turn. No sweat, and firing off with a very respectable amount of heavy weapons. And that's just at the base level. You can also take into account that if you put a unit with Scout inside a dedicated transport, so a unit of Castellans inside a Chimera, then the Chimera gets the Scout ability. So now you have a vehicle which turn 1 can Scout move forward 6 inches, and they can also then move 10. You can also take advantage of things like the move order, which does affect vehicles, and so you can have a vehicle that's going 19 inches and advances. You're just very, very fast, and it's actually something that a lot of Guard armies have struggled with over many editions. Maneuverability and speed, just being able to get to those objectives quickly, being able to lock them down from the first turn, not having to turn up turn 2, turn 3, then fight your way onto them. Mech Guard allows you to go forward, speed, violence, momentum, and start taking the fight to the enemy. It's a very nice feeling as a Guard player to feel like you're on the offensive and to have the momentum and the initiative. But what makes Mech Guard specifically right now so powerful in 10th edition? Well, 10th edition is often described as a game as standing on circles. There are primary objectives on the map, circles, and whoever stands on those objectives the most or the best wins the game. It's not quite that simple. You have secondary objectives as well, but that is a really simplified way of looking at it. And so Mech Guard is very good in 10th edition because A, you get to those circles quickly, and B, not only do you take them, but you hold them. You have a unit like a Chimera with a unit of infantry inside it that goes onto an objective And bear in mind that a lot of objectives tend to have at least part of them hidden behind like hidden behind a ruin or some landslide blocking terrain. What you can do is you can drive your Chimera on. Even the Chimera can't hide out of line of sight. When the enemy destroys that Chimera, guess what? The infantry get out. And sure, the infantry are battle shocked the turn they get out, but it comes back round to your command phase. As long as there's at least half of them in the unit, they're not battle shocked anymore. And you get them out behind landslide blocking terrain onto the objective, and it's still yours. And so it's very difficult to remove Met Guard off objective. Once they've got there, they kind of stay there. And we're looking at this through the lens of one Chimera, but you're not taking one. You're taking 6, and you're taking 10 infantry inside each one of those, which, funnily enough, kind of starts having the advantage that Infantry Guard has, which is you have great objective control, because that's not 10 infantry are dumping onto an objective, that's 20 OC. And the enemy has probably spunked most of their firepower taking the Chimera out. They won't have much left over to deal with the subsequent infantry that's panning out. Now, there are exceptions to this. You have close combat and stuff like that. Someone could shoot you and then follow up with the charge. Of course. But by and large, if you send what I like to call an armoured fist platoon onto an objective, a couple of Chimeras, maybe 3 if you really need to take it, backed up by a Lehman Russ or 2, you're going to move on to that objective, you're going to lock it down, and you're going to keep it. And anyone that comes near, you're going to blast them. Because Met Guard has a lot of firepower. This is one of the other reasons why it's doing so well in 10th edition. Because 10th edition is a shooting game. There are armies that are good at combat, you have World Eaters and stuff like that, but by and large, 10th edition is a very shooty edition. A good example of this is Space Marines and Ironstorm Spearhead. What is the best attachment that Space Marines can take? Oh, it's the one that has all the guns. Well, Met Guard's standard weapon, the lowest weapon in your army, tends to be a heavy bolter, which is actually a pretty good bit of kit. It's 3 shots, sustained hits, got strength 5, AP 1, damage 2. It's not like the standard bit of kit in a infantry guard list, which is a lasgun. Because when you think about it, every guard vehicle can come with between 1 and 3 heavy bolters strapped to it, and that is your lowest gun. Sure, you've got a few bits like heavy stubbers and whatnot around here and there, but really your lowest, most common weapon is going to be things like a heavy bolter, and that is the lowest part. When every Chimera can have 2 heavy bolters, a heavy stubber, and you can have a hunter killer missile, and you've got the las guns on the side, and then you've got people that are shooting at the top with the firing deck. Maybe that's a couple of flamers, maybe that's a las cannon from an infantry squad that's inside. And then you've got, and that's just your basic metal box. 125, 130 points for the Chimera and the squad inside. Then you get to the real firepower, the Lehman Russes. Each one of those packing a huge punch on its turret, backed up by las cannons, plasma cannons, multi-melters, you name it, they've got it. So Met Guard is powerful in 10th edition because it plays so well into the meta. We're in a meta of firepower and vehicles. Obviously, the playstyle that's all firepower and vehicles is going to do well. But all of this meta, anti-meta talk, really, that's for amateurs. Because the true guard playstyle, the truly powerful way, and possibly the most powerful way to play your guard right now, is artillery guard. All of the Krieg players right now just got a very uncomfortable feeling in their trousers. Is that a shovel in your pants, or are you pleased to see me? From the beginning of 10th edition, this playstyle has been a problem. A problem for people facing it, but it has been very dominant, and GW has taken step after step after step to try and rein it in, and yet it's still there, rearing its ugly head, blasting people off the board within 2 or 3 turns. The level of firepower that Artillery Guard brings and how potent that can be is staggering. Artillery Guard is not just about taking all of the artillery pieces and blasting people off the table, though. There is much more to it. The thing about artillery is it is quite powerful, but it is also very fragile. And if your opponent gets first turn, it's particularly fast army, if you've only taken indirect fire weapons, you might end up getting 1 volley in. It might be a hell of a good volley, but then you're going to get carved up like a cake. Artillery Guard is generally one that actually leans into a few different areas. So you'll have an emphasis on indirect fire. You'll take between 4 and 6 artillery pieces, and they're going to be doing a lot of damage. But then you're going to have other units that are going to be doing objectives for you. You might have things like some Kazakin or lots of infantry providing screening lines, delaying the enemy so that your artillery has turn after turn to do its work. You'll also have some direct firepower, some hard armor targets like tanks. I tend to describe the best artillery guard army as almost a hybrid guard army that has just dropped a bit of infantry, dropped a couple of tanks, still got some of those elements, but has then more specced into your indirect fire. Whereas pure infantry tends to be pure infantry and mechanized tends to be only really sort of vehicles and tanks and stuff like that, your artillery is, when best used, when most leveraged, it's going to have an emphasis on indirect fire, but not only indirect fire. As a result, you'll find that your artillery heavy guard armies play very similarly to a hybrid one. You're going to have infantry that will be doing primary objectives. You're going to have some specialist units like Cyclopses or Sounds deep striking down and doing the secondary objectives and stuff like that. But where your main damage is coming from is from that indirect fire. And you're going to have a number of units in your army which are dedicated to getting the most juice out of that artillery. You'll have things like Scout Sentinels, which allow you to use Daring Recon to not only get reroll 1s for your artillery, but also to start ignoring the penalties for shooting out of line of sight. You're also going to have things that will be able to boost the artillery's AP, because things like your Manticores and your Basilisks only have AP -2, so if they're shooting against particularly hard targets, maybe like a 2-up save, like a Terminator or something, then they're only reducing that down to a 3-up save. There's things like Armor Contempt that could fly around. So you'll have things like Creed, which will be in the list, who can do Fields of Fire. You might have the Lord Soul, who can generate you X CP, so you can do 2 Fields of Fire in 1 round. And you might find that if you are taking 2 or 3 main battle tanks, rather than the usual 3 to 5 main battle tanks, that those main battle tanks will either be able to look after themselves like demolishers, or they're going to be there to support the artillery further, such as exterminators using Withering Hail to get even more AP going down. But what makes guard artillery so powerful right now in 10th edition? I think it comes down to 2 things. Firstly, it's all of those aforementioned buffs that guard can put on their artillery. Your Manticore, your Basilisk might look like it's hitting a ballistic skill 4 with -1 when shooting indirect because of how indirect works, but the reality of the situation is even when firing indirect, it's probably hitting on 2s, rolling 1s. You might think, how the hell is it achieving that? Well, Manticores have heavy. Most of your artillery has heavy. If it stays still, which is going to, it gets +1 to hit. So even if it's staying still and shooting out of line of sight, it's not hitting at 4 -1. It's hitting at 4 -1 for indirect, +1 for heavy. Then you can apply the take aim order to the vehicle, to the artillery piece. A lot of people get this wrong. A lot of people think that you can't have heavy and take aim. You can. This comes up all the time. I did a video last week, and I don't think a week goes by when someone doesn't comment down, but you can't have take aim and heavy. You can. Because take aim increases the ballistic skill characteristic, and heavy gives you +1 to the dice roll. And in 10th edition, those are 2 separate things. So you have heavy plus take aim. And I hit on 3s. But what about that Scout Sentinel we mentioned? What about Daring Recon? That lets you ignore -1 to hit penalty. Daring Recon a unit using a Scout Sentinel. I hit on 2s, but Daring Recon also gives you reroll 1s. So through the simple application, it sounds complicated, but when you boil it down, the simple application of 1 order and a Scout Sentinel, your artillery can hit on a 2+, rerolling 1s. That is a very, very accurate level of firepower from an army like Gar, which is traditionally meant to have volume but not accuracy. Well, that is volume and accuracy, and it's definitely volume because you've got things like the Basilisk, which is D6 +3 shots. That is eminently reliable. And even if you go for things like the Manticores or the Medusas, which have only got D6 plus 1 or D6 shots respectively, they're relatively affordable. A Medusa is 110 points. You could take 3 of those, so even though each one is only doing D6 shots, so one of them might screw it up and roll the big fat 1, the other 2 might be able to bring it back. For on average, those 3 things fire 10.5 shots, or 10 to 11 shots. At strength 10 minus 3, flat 3 damage. Now the Medusa, to be fair, would only be hitting on, I believe, 3s rerolling 1s, because its base basically is 5+, but that's still very, very good. And the Manticores, if you had 2 of them, would find 2d6 plus 2 shots hitting on 2s rerolling 1s for about the same price. And this is volume before we even take into account the Blast special rule, which is going to start giving you loads more shots. Those that don't know, the Blast special rule in 10th edition is for every 5 models in an enemy unit, you get +1 shot. And all of your artillery has Blast. So even if you're shooting at a basic 10-man generic infantry squad from almost any faction, that Manticore is now going from D6 plus 1, D6 plus 1, because of its weapon, plus 2 for Blast. In on 2s, rerolling 1s. But wait, there's more! Because not only do you have accuracy, not only do you have volume, but you've also got lethality. Literally lethal hits. The Guard Combined Arms Detachment special rule is the only detachment we've got right now because we're still in an index. It says any Guard unit, if it stays still, gets lethal hits. From the lowliest Guardsman to the mightiest battle tank, anything that stays still, if it rolls a 6 to hit, gets to automatically wound. Now for a lot of Guard units, this isn't very good because you want to be moving around, like taking objectives and stuff. But artillery is perfect. You don't want to be moving. You want to be staying still. In fact, you want to deploy out of line of sight, never move the entire game if you can get away with it, because you'll be benefiting from your heavy, because you stayed still, and you'll be benefiting from your lethal hits, because you stayed still. So the firepower has everything. There's like no disadvantages to the firepower. But looking at this from the perspective of just your artillery is very wrong, because that's not what is making Guard artillery really good right now. What's really sealed the deal is there is no counter battery out there at the moment. You see, Games Workshop rightfully noticed that there were some indirect fire problems at the beginning of 10th edition. You had, I think, Desolation Marines just blasting people. You had Eldar decals. There's all sorts of crazy stuff that was just shooting at people and it couldn't be shot back. And so over the course of various balance patches and various Munitorum field manuals, everyone's artillery has gone up to the point where a lot of factions just don't take their indirect fire anymore. You don't see the Tau with the airburst fragmentation things. You don't really see the Eldar Night Spinners. You don't really see Whirlwinds or anything like that anymore. No one else is really taking indirect fire. GW has kind of nerfed it to the point where most armies have just gone, fuck it, fine, we'll move on and take something else. But not Guard. Because we have so many artillery options, from mortar teams that come in at 60 points, up to Manticores, which cost 180 points, which is pretty expensive. But there's so much in between that. You've got Basilisks, which are only 135. You've got Earthshaker platforms, which are like 110, 120 maybe. You've got Field Ores batteries. Hell, you've got the Praetor. You've got what's almost a Titanic artillery piece. There's so many different indirect fire options that no matter which ones GW has nerfed over the course of the last 8 months, what's actually happened is Guard players have just pivoted to a different choice each time, to the next cheapest one. Or they've just stuck with certain ones, like just sticking with Basilisks and things like that. But everyone else's factions, all the other armies out there, they've got rid of their indirect fire. And what this has resulted in is a battlefield, is a meta, where Guard can put the vast majority of their damage dealing capability out of line of sight, completely safe, with almost no way for the opponents to get to it and reach it. If you're in a situation where you're taking lots of artillery and your opponent is starting to blow that artillery up and get into combat with it and chop it up and shoot it up, the game was already lost before that happened. Something's gone catastrophically wrong. What happens in pretty much all guard games where the guard player leans heavily into the artillery? The guard player might not win the game, but if he loses lots of the stuff, do you know the one thing that's always left? Goddamn artillery sat behind our line of sight blocking terrain. And there's a lot of line of sight blocking terrain right now. GW has got rid of loads of indirect fire for other factions, and then they've made the boards really, really dense to stop people from just taking direct firepower, planet bowling ball, and just blasting each other off the table in one turn. But this has actually created a weird paradoxical situation where there's no artillery out there to threaten the guard artillery, and a lot of the guard direct fire options are now, it's a little risky moving them up the board, getting them close in case the enemy jumps out and ganks them. So what the guard players are doing is just going, well, I'll just go back to my artillery then. It's safe, it can shoot out, it's a little bit more expensive than before, but it's going to shoot every single turn of the game. Unlike a Liam Russell might roll around a corner, shoot for one turn, and then get blown up, but does a lot of damage in one turn, artillery might do less damage an individual turn, but it's going to fire over 5 turns. So overall, it's going to do a lot more damage. And because there's so much dense terrain out there as well, what you find is, especially with like UKTC boards and WTC boards, some of these standard terrain maps which are becoming very popular, people are able to hide their entire army out of line of sight turn 1. Now, if you're a faction, like if you're a guard player that's heavily invested in direct firepower, and you get first turn, you can't see the enemy. Well, you essentially pass a turn. You might move out and take a few objectives. You essentially pass a turn, and then the enemy might get the chance to come back and counter push you once you've moved out and exposed yourself. But if you've got artillery, doesn't matter where the enemy hides. All the guard artillery is like 48-inch range or higher. I think the Bazas is still 240-inch range, something wonderful. So it allows you to interact with the enemy from turn 1. It allows you to put the pressure onto them. It allows you, if you do get turn 1, you're like, okay, but I don't want to move out this turn. I'm going to start bombarding the enemy. And you know what's funny? They can't wait around. Because if they wait around, I'm just going to keep bombarding them, just chip away at them and just weaken them so much that when it gets to the later turns of the game, when I do decide to come out, they won't be able to stop me. So it forces the enemy to then make the uncomfortable decision, like a rock and a hard place, where then they have to come out to you. And then they come out, they expose themselves first, and then your direct firepower gets to have a party. And this is why when I say in artillery armies, it's not just about the artillery. It's about having that mixture and how the artillery is so effective because it forces your opponents, it's how it interacts with the other units in your list. So that's why artillery is so good in 10th edition right now, because it can shoot at the enemy can't shoot back. There's no indirect fire options really opposing you apart from other guard players, and the terrain is so dense right now that allows you to stay safe whilst forcing your opponent to come at you. Well, at least that's what I think. But of course, all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you think down in that comment section below. Do you agree with this top 3 list of guard playstyles? Or do you think there's a particular kind of army that I've missed out? And what are the top 3 playstyles and army lists that you think are knocking around for other factions outside the guard? Like, what do you think the top 3 Space Marine playstyle is right now? Ironstorm, Ironstorm, Ironstorm? Maybe. If you've enjoyed today's video, don't forget to smash that like button and also subscribe to never miss an episode. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian Glory Hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and Patreons. You guys are amazing. Truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordy and Glory full-time without the incredible and generous support of my members. So thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a heartfelt thank you to Alex Dengal, Bon Vert, Mad Larkin, Marcus Roberts, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, Try Again Bragg, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, and August Barney. Seriously guys, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support is incredible and it makes a huge difference. Thank you so much. That's all for now. Hope you've all enjoyed today's video, and of course, as always, see you guys next time.